Okay, let's get this thing started. Greetings, everyone. I am Matt Bogosian, Executive Director of the American Manufacturing Communities Collaborative, AMCC. And this webinar is on cybersecurity in manufacturing. Thanks to a grant by the Economic Development Administration to the Center for Regional Economic Competitiveness, CREC. This briefing is part of a four-part series on sustainable development in manufacturing. Thanks especially to Ken Poole and Bob Isaacson at CREC for their support. Next slide there, David. To set the stage, this XY chart illustrates the progress of the American project, where we are and the crossroads we've reached on many fronts. And the horizontal line there, of course, is time. The vertical line represents the sustainable development indicators that we're all working to understand so we can find more agency to move the needle toward a sustainable society. So next slide. And what we know so far is that there are four component parts to sustainable development that apply to American manufacturing and the project overall. That is, unless we improve and maintain improvements in all four of these areas, we're unlikely to become a sustainable society. All this especially applies to the manufacturing sector because, as we always discuss, it's the cornerstone of the American project. So that little figure there that represents the American project, it looks like a jellyfish. Well, it is a jellyfish, a special kind of jellyfish called Teratopsis dohranii, or commonly known as the immortal jellyfish. We picked that to represent the human project there because that particular jellyfish has some regenerative properties. So it's the kind of thing that the human project needs more of. Next slide. Zooming in on the places where each of us can make a difference. This kind of blow up of the jellyfish simply shows the venues where we can find agency, shaping the public governance and rule of law at all levels, and then those public, private, nonprofit organizations where the norms and activities that take place advance outcomes that produce more sustainable development. The bottom lines represent how our personal behaviors are also an important part of guiding the trajectory of the American project. So with this background, we've put on this four-part series of sustainable development in manufacturing. And you can see on the bottom right, we've covered two parts of the sustainable manufacturing already, and both on the social equity aspects, DEI in manufacturing, and environmental sustainability in manufacturing. Today's briefing is on the important security aspect of sustainable development in manufacturing, and more specifically, cybersecurity. Next slide. We're delighted to have some incredible experts to talk about the scope of the challenges and opportunities in dealing with thieves and dictators who aim to slow down America's manufacturing progress. So we'll go in this order with Chris Buthe, Manager, Cyber Physical Security Services and Defense Services at California's MEP, the California Manufacturing Technology Consulting. And then we'll have Nichelle Williams, Director of Research for CREC, also happens to be a United States Army officer. And then we'll have Ben Linville-Engler, Chief Investment Strategist and Program Executive from the Massachusetts Technology Collaborative, a place where David and I were fortunate enough to visit on Monday in Boston. So next slide. Before I turn this over to Chris, let me share with you this outline of a new White House National Cybersecurity Strategy that was just released at the beginning of this month. It's a 39-page document organized around these 5 areas with 22 strategic objectives. Some of these areas our speakers will be speaking to today. After these short presentations by Chris, Nichelle, and Ben, time permitting, we'll have a short discussion, Q&A, until a quarter past the next hour. So if you have questions, please put them in chat so we can raise them at the end. All these slides and the recording of this webinar will be made available after the briefing. So without further ado, Chris from CMTC. Thanks for being here.
And Matt, thank you very much. I'll wait a second while we get something up, but I'm very happy and very privileged to be here. Thank you for inviting us to be here, and thanks everybody for your time. When we get into the presentation mode, there we go. So I guess to kind of start off today's, I get to do that, and I'll say that we're talk about identifying challenges. And when we say manufacturing, we really mean two different manufacturing supply chains here. One of them is the production supply chain that we're very familiar with talking about. And then the other one is the innovation supply chain, where ideas from the United States come to life and they become something that could be manufactured and put into the production chain. Both of those face challenges from our adversaries. So just for a second, we need words in the English language. They get reused so many times. So just for the purpose of today, let's say challenge is an adversarial threat and our ability to deal with it. So that's kind of to set the table and why we're calling this a challenge. Next slide, please. So these are not necessarily endorsed by DoD or Defense Acquisition University or any of the other organizations you see here. This is just, my own take on things. Next slide. So I get to represent partially here with a huge consortium of people that are here in the state of California called Cadence. And it is led by Eileen Sanchez of our California Governor's Office of Planning and Research. And I know that Eileen's in the audience today. Thank you for being here, Eileen. She started this, and it has now grown into a large consortium that continues to grow as we're speaking here. Next. So what this is Cadence is the California Advanced Defense Ecosystems and National Consortia effort. And it's an initiative funded by DoD to strengthen the resiliency of the national security innovation and manufacturing base. And it's as it says, it's a consortium, a network of networks with multiple partners. Some of these have their own consortiums, but it's academia, nonprofits, economic development agencies, state and federal organizations, and of course, industry. So it's very similar to what Matt was talking about a few minutes ago, right? It's actually a group of many networks of networks. And so we put this forth as kind of the model. Next. And I think Eileen came up with a great way of visualizing this, and that is that the success of this thing called Cadence, it depends on all partner collaboration. And she put together a recipe. And so her question is what's the recipe for other people? Because we want to know that too, right? How do you put the different parts that you see here together and we start to make something that really takes life? And then it starts to, be bigger than any one of the parts. It starts to become a whole. Next. So let's identify some of these challenges. Again, these are adversarial threats and our ability to deal with it in both of these two supply chains. Next. And I have to say, we got some work to do to be that sustainable entity that Matt was discussing. Next. So let's do a couple more definitions. For adversary, let's everyone on their own pick out a couple of entities, a couple of countries that you believe are an important adversary to the United States. And then let's take the perspective of that adversary and what is their intent and their objective to do to the United States. And then let's look at our deficits where, for whatever reason, we are probably not as ready as we would like to be in order to meet that adversary's challenge to us. Next. So one of the first principles of an adversary is to attack their enemy, and in this case, the adversary is thinking it's the United States, where we are weak. And you could think of a lot of things. Cybersecurity is one of them. And one of the things we want to say is cybersecurity, even though we have a tendency to talk about it as if it's on its own, it's never on its own. Cybersecurity is part of a larger set of weaknesses, a larger set of skills when we have it. But unfortunately, on our side, we have a real deficit in the cyber workforce. There's over 300,000 unfilled jobs in the cyber workforce in the United States today. And that may even be a conservative number, depending on how you define it. So we've got a serious deficit here that we'll have to make up over a very long period of time. Next. So the adversary, in this case, has got a very long-term horizon, and they intend to be persistent for a long time. We're talking 5-year, 10-year, 20-year plans that they put into force already, 30-year plans. They're not looking at victory tomorrow. They're looking at a long-term conflict. And then our deficit is, it's kind of in our nature to have a short-term orientation. Sometimes it's in business, sometimes it's in the way we plan our finances, but in the United States, we tend to have a short-term orientation. That plays to the adversary's favor. Next. So the adversary, they're very adept at finding ways to infiltrate. And in the case of today, we'll be talking about cyber, but we know that's not alone. So an infiltration could be in any form that, of course, will affect cyber too. And here, we really seem to have an insufficient capability to handle insider threats here in the United States. We seem to lack a lot of organized methodologies to handle when we do get an infiltration and when an insider, either purposeful insider threat or an inadvertent insider threat happens. And then how do we deal with it? How do we recognize it? How do we detect it? And then how do we disarm it? Next. And then when it comes to cyber infiltration, the adversary is looking for something that goes undetected. And we know from the FBI that sometimes FBI people have told us it was up to 90% of the cyber infiltrations into people's networks have gone undetected for 6 months, 9 months in a row. And very commonly, when they come to our manufacturers and the FBI comes and knocks on their door and says, you have an agent in your system. Are you aware? And they say, no, we're not. So they're not even aware. They did not detect the fact that they had a cyber infiltration into their system. That points to our deficit, which we have a difficulty in building our cyber defenses in order to detect and deter any form of a cyber attack that is not meant to be noisy. It's meant to be very quiet. Next. So many people are used to talking about our attack surface, but not everyone is. And then how is that attack surface manifested when you're a manufacturer? Next. So CFIUS, the Committee for Foreign Investment in the United States, helps us to define this. And they look at 3 different vectors of an attack coming in. It could be in the transactional nature, the human nature, or in the cyber nature. And they're going to affect for our defense industrial base or any industry, in other words, our critical manufacturing, they're going to come into the actual manufacturers themselves, either the primes or the broader supply chain. They're also going to enter our universities, our research labs, our R&D labs, because that's that innovation supply chain. And then they're definitely going to use financial weapons, use money as a weapon. And so this helps us to kind of look at and organize, all right, if I'm a manufacturer, whether I'm small or medium or large, what is the adversary's intent? Next. So here's a visualization of it. CFIUS is helping us to know that the top layer, the red layer here, is transactions. These are all forms of transactions that every business, whether you're small or medium or large, you're using these things to do a transaction. The white layer below it is the infrastructure that enables those transactions. And the blue layer below that is the next layer of infrastructure that enables the white layer of infrastructure. So when you look at this, if you're a manufacturer, you're depending on each one of these little spheres. And when any one of these spheres was to be attacked by a cyber adversary, it starts to eat away. at our overall sustainability. Goes right back to what Matt was talking about a while ago. How do we sustain all of these entities? Software is particularly vulnerable. Telecom is vulnerable. And you just see where any one of these would be something that we need to think about as an industry. Next. So when you get down to the individual businesses, we're all kind of accustomed to looking at information networks. We look at our internal network, and then, we even need to look at our homes. Home is a good example for this particular one in an information network, because you've got IoT devices, you've got some form of operational networks inside your home as well as your business. In business, we also look at our people. The people are absolutely a target. And that means even our service providers and our vendors are a target. And then when people become either an inadvertent or a purposeful insider threat, that's another human vector for that. In the cloud services, we're learning more and more every day that the cloud has its own vulnerabilities. Software's got its vulnerabilities. When you start to use more and more software as a service and apps, your attack surface grows exponentially. And then finally, we need to look at our supply chain, because we're all part of this living entity called business. And so our suppliers and our customers are targets on their own right, and yet we need to exist as part of that supply chain. Next. So cyber is a primary thought of a threat vector that we look at, we all talk about. It does not exist alone. It exists with all of these that you see there. And so I believe we need to look at this as a mastermind, especially at a nation state level, who is doing a highly architected attack. This is something that's going to go on over a long period of time, 5 years, 10 years, and they're going to use all the weapons that they have that you see here to be highly architected. Cyber may be their favorite, but these do not exist isolated. They're all integrated. Next. So when it comes to foreign ownership, control, and influence, what our government calls FOCI, every one of the things you see here are being actively exploited in the United States. And so we need to look at these, because it's part of our own attack surface. It's part of our own vulnerabilities. So each one of these, you see it. Now, I'll go right to the last one. Is the food industry has become really a target in the last year. In the last year, everything has changed. But in this particular industry, they're just really left and right. Beverage industries, food processing industries, food distribution areas, it's quite widespread. We always think about defense, but we need to start really looking at the food industry. Next. I suggest that you might want to go take a look at this. If you haven't read it already, the annual threat assessment by DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, it was released on February the 6th, was the most recent one. It's got a lot of good information in there, and I think it'll help us all begin the conversation with each other about what we do. Because when we have something in common to go look at, and it's been very carefully studied and put together, I suggest that that helps us all to talk about it together. Next. So in the defense industrial base in particular, there's something I want you to all be very aware of, and that is this thing called DMSMS, or Diminishing Manufacturing Sources and Material Shortage. Everything that we put up here on the screen, you're going to have links to. I think that this is a very good thing to go read. You can see that there's lots of content in here, policy, knowledge portal, learning modules about what happens when our manufacturing sources start to diminish, or when we run short of particular critical material. And there's even a guidebook for it. Next. Another area is in DLA. They buy everything. They're basically like the Amazon for the Department of Defense. And there is part of this that is called surge and sustainment. We have to have this ability to surge or ramp up quickly and to sustain replenishment of wartime consumables at an increased pace. We're that way right now. We have to have the increased ability to surge. And that's something we all need to talk about, because it's affecting our manufacturers right now. It's an industrial capability, and it's also something that we have to have for sustainability. Next. Another agency I'd like you to take a look at. It's called the Maintaining Technology Advantage, part of the DoD Research and Engineering. They are charged with interacting with the U.S. defense industry, our universities, our research institutions. So they're part of this whole thing. And they're very active in trying to protect the innovation that the United States is famous for developing. We're also famous for having it stolen. So that exploitation, this organization works with many other organizations, including CFIUS, to try to gauge where we're at, what's going on. Next slide, please. And if you all noticed, there is a new creation of something called the Disruptive Technology Strike Force. It was just stood up on February the 16th. It will be in at least 10, it will be 12 metropolitan regions across the United States. It's a combination of the Justice Department and the Commerce Department. I think we can all look for this and say, to keep in tune with it, and then see how it can either help us or how we can be involved. Next, please. So if you know CMTC and you know Eileen from our Cadence area, you know we're always action oriented. So we always want to end this with something that would say, let's have a series of actions that you can actually do. You may be doing some of these already, but they will help you reduce and defend your attack surface and improve your survivability. So let's just go through these quickly. I just want to bring them to your attention. I believe you'll all get copies of this, so you'll be able to hit the links and be able to use these if you're not using them already. Next. So here's the 12 things, but I'll just pass this slide. It's like our 12 top things we would recommend you do. Next. So the first one is going to be cyber compliance. This existing cyber compliance DFARS regulation has been around since 2017. Many of you may have already done it, but it's never done. You have to do this constantly. I have to do it every single year, if not every quarter, if not every day. So just keep up with that cybersecurity compliance. And if you still have some things to do, reach out to everybody and get some help. In cyber resilience, I think we really need to pay a lot more attention here, and you'll see some things in a minute, but ransomware is hitting and hurting everyone, and there are some definite things we can do about that. In operation security, sometimes we're neglecting to go this route. It's threat situational awareness for all threat vectors, including cybersecurity, but not limited to cybersecurity. And the purpose really is to deny adversaries the opportunity to get what they want. And then finally, one of the things for manufacturers is about 70 to 80% of all manufacturers use a third-party IT provider. It's an imperative to oversee that IT provider and what they either add or help you with your attack surface. Next, please. So I'd like you to investigate, if you're not already, CDSE, the Center for the Development of Security Excellence. If you are a classified facility or a cleared facility, you're using this already. But if you're not, if you're an unclassified, there's a lot of things here that you can use. We use them. CMTC uses this constantly, and we use it even to train the manufacturers in the state of California. Next. Beware of the insertion of unknowns. It was first really, talked about and written under the MITRE, deliver uncompromised. But imagine that there's an unknown counterfeit part that enters your supply chain, or an unknown piece of software, or some unknown money, some unknown adversarial capital, where you don't know where that money came from. These are all an insertion by an adversary, and you may not know where any of these things came from. So beware of unknowns. Next. Keep your EAR and ITAR processes up to date. They're going to be constantly changing. And it's because of the Department of Commerce and the Bureau of Industry and Security. Here's just some examples, but you should be looking at this all the time. It takes constant maintenance of your ITAR in order to keep it up to date. Next. Shields Up. Use Shields Up. There's a lot of great tools here. There's a critical manufacturing sector security guide. It definitely includes cybersecurity, securing the software supply chain. These are just some examples. Excellent materials on ransomware. There's so many good tools here, I can't even tell you. So next. One of them is the supply chain risk management tool. If you don't have a formalized supply chain risk management practice, this is a great way to get started. There's like 6 steps that they've broken it out into. It's got great templates. You'll be able to take this and use it immediately. Next. Also, use the CISA common vulnerabilities and exposures. Keep up to date on that. If you're using a cyber provider or any form of a cyber services, make sure that this is part of their duties in order to keep your company as protected as possible. Next. Subscribe to a cyber advisory, probably one that's in your area, but you can do it around. I subscribe to several from different states, but here's the one from California as an example. They can contain all kinds of great alerts, such as the CVEs and other items that should be something that you would get automatically in however way you like to receive it, whether it's an email or other form. Next. And in CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, it may help you to define your own resilience. And they break it down by workforce resilience, climate resilience, supply chain resilience, and cyber resilience. None of these stand alone. They all are together. Next, please. So once again, kind of look at all your own attack surfaces. Look at these 4 areas. Find another area that we're not even considering here and see how all those tools that you just saw and other things that you talk with people, and we all need to be talking a lot more about our attack surfaces and how we can share information with each other, information sharing. Next, please. So thank you. There's our contact information. If you have anything else that you would like to know about, please let us know. Matt, back to you.
Great, Chris. Thank you so much. If folks have questions, you can put them in the chat, and hopefully we can get to them, get some of those at the end. I'm curious for sure, Chris, when we talk at the end, some of those 10 to 12 cities where that, where the strike force is looking at. So let's turn now to Nichelle Williams from CREC, and as an officer in the United States Army. Thank you for your service. Nichelle, looking forward to hearing about what you've learned on cybersecurity down there in North Carolina.
Sure. So just a quick update. Yes, cybersecurity warfare officer in the United States Army. So I do this on both the civilian side and also protecting our national infrastructure on the Army side too. But just a quick good afternoon to everyone. Again, Nichelle Williams, I'm the Director of Research here for the Center for Regional Economic Competitiveness. And I'm going to walk you all through just kind of a brief look into the cybersecurity talent pipeline in North Carolina's manufacturing sector. And it's based on a year-long study that CREC recently completed for the Carolina Cyber Network. Next slide. So here's a quick overview of what I'll cover. I'll touch on the Carolina Cyber Network's interest in learning more about the cybersecurity employment pipeline for the manufacturing sector in particular. Highlight why being able to understand these talent needs are important. And then I'll discuss some of the key findings from the report that are relevant to the sector. And just a quick description of the Carolina Cyber Network. It's a comprehensive, innovative workforce development initiative among a selection of North Carolina's cybersecurity-focused educational institutions. And they work together to meet the current cybersecurity talent requirements for North Carolina's public agencies and then also their private sectors. Next slide. So the Carolina Cyber Network, or CCN, their mission is to strengthen cybersecurity capabilities throughout the state through talent development. And their employment projections depict an increase in available cybersecurity jobs across the state within the next decade. And then with this anticipated increase in jobs in this field over time, CCN is facilitating working groups, and they strategize on how to best prepare for this future. And particularly, CCN has a working group that is geared towards the manufacturing sector. Next slide. So IT, computers, cybersecurity, they are all support services for the main focus of a business's operation. And most of us just want it to work the way it was intended to when it's powered on. So having access to that professional that can just make sure that all the system, updates are current, that's pretty helpful. So be it enumeration, which is, someone poking around a system that's trying to find that vulnerability or to exploit it, or that gains unauthorized access, be it intentional or unintentional, or even that denial of service attack. Those are risks that accompany the adoption of integrated technology that enhance our manufacturing operations and services. And so yes, without infrastructural support and protocols that address these risks, manufacturers are targets. And depending on the type of manufacturing that you're conducting, you've been deemed critical infrastructure by our cybersecurity agency. And while equipment failures happen, there's always a monetary value associated with that failure. But as we have seen recently, the cost of undermined public confidence, that's invaluable. And in the case of business, this could be very damaging to the brand. And with this, early in the background research portion of the Carolina Cyber Network study, small and medium-sized manufacturers told us that in-house cybersecurity just isn't affordable. And then with their expertise being manufacturing, it was also a challenge for them to even know the specifics of what type of cybersecurity services they needed to reduce their overall risk profile. Next slide. So CCN's manufacturing working group, it's focused on addressing these issues and then other concerns that have arisen, and it's through a variety of avenues. So first, they're making cyber readiness assessment tools available for small and medium-sized manufacturers. They're working to establish a cyber manufacturing hub. They're also providing industry-recognized training for cybersecurity professionals that will be working specifically with manufacturers. And then recently, the group has made progress by hosting workshops, also establishing MOUs that are focused on curriculum development, preparing these future employees, and then also have worked to obtain research funding for a couple of federal agencies on these topics. And the group also plans to conduct cyber education workshops that are related to the industry in particular. And again, this would be focused on preparing cyber professionals that are familiar with the specific needs of our manufacturing firms. Next slide. So CCN working groups and strategy sessions, they were already operational before this study. But CCN partnered with CREC because they wanted a labor market assessment of the whole network. And individually, colleges that belong to the network, they were making their connections in their communities to their local manufacturers. But CCN, again, wanted to know how that looked across the state. So during the study, we conducted interviews and focus groups with these firms, these hiring managers or supervisors. We conducted a survey, and we also included existing labor market data in our analysis. Now, next slide. And now here are some of the key findings, and this is not new, but it was something that we definitely wanted to state here. Like, the landscape has changed. Cyber threats evolve, and they have evolved within the last 3 years. And particularly among smaller manufacturing companies, the changes that will be able to address this evolution, they knew they were necessary, but they were unrealized, couldn't get to it. So that was a finding that we definitely wanted to make sure, hey, you guys are on target, they're gonna need these folks in the future. And then we also, identified, hey, manufacturing is not a technology-centric industry. Technology supports manufacturing. And as such, the sector, specifically those small and medium-sized businesses, they run into challenges with obtaining and then retaining their cyber talent. And they told us specifically, those small manufacturers said, hey, our industry is not necessarily perceived as, being on the leading edge of technology. And that makes it difficult for us as employers to overcome some of the assumptions that our, potential cybersecurity employees have about some of the limited applications of manufacturing the industry. And then frankly, it limits their interest, these candidates' interest in even pursuing a cybersecurity position in this industry in particular. So it was something, again, that rose up. And then employers in the field, they're also looking for cyber talent that are proficient in soft skills. So customer service matters. As you're working with practitioners that just want their system to work, they want to work with a cybersecurity professional that's able to navigate that very tense situation. That's pretty important to them. And then also, manufacturers are looking for professionals that have technical skills that enable them to manage systems on day one. So professionals entering the field, they want them to have hands-on technical experience through apprenticeships and internships that, that's ideal for them coming in from the educational sphere into manufacturing the workplace. Next slide. So I'll close with some of the recommendations that CREC provided to CCN in order to strengthen some of the efforts that they had already in flux. So one was to work to figure out what the desired knowledge, skills, abilities, and experience for these small and medium-sized manufacturers, which helps, CCN ensure that any training or education opportunities that they are, crafting or revising, they're a match to what's actually needed in the field or in that firm or in those firms. And also that CCN collaborate through military and manufacturing focused partnerships that, again, will help strengthen any training or education opportunities that are available through those pathways. And then finally, as well, having them expand their knowledge base of the cybersecurity issues that are specific to manufacturing or manufacturers. And that's in order to tailor, again, those training opportunities or education opportunities that suit the needs of professionals entering and working specifically in the manufacturing industry itself. Next slide. So I'm sure we'll have questions at the end, but there's my contact if anything is forgotten and once you want to send me an email after today.
Well, thank you so much, Nichelle. That really fits in. Your research there really fits into what Chris was talking about the deficit in terms of cybersecurity people. I think he mentioned 300,000, and so how we attack that particular portion of the problem is super important. So thank you for that perspective of what you learned there in North Carolina. So let us now turn to Massachusetts for Ben Linville-Engler. Some of you may in AMCC may recall Ben has been a BFF of AMCC and was very active in kind of modeling a response during the COVID on how we strengthen our manufacturing supply chain for PPE and testing gear. That was a great set of learnings there. So Ben's got a lot of experience there. And give us your take in Massachusetts on this cyber challenge, Ben.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, for having me, and excited to jump in with everybody on a few of the things that we're doing here in Massachusetts on the intersection of manufacturing and cybersecurity. So as Matt said, my name is Ben Linville-Engler. I serve as the Chief Investment Strategist and Program Executive at MassTech, and I'll go into a slide that'll help to explain my role a little bit and who we are at MassTech. I'm also currently the Acting Director for our Mass Cyber Center, which is one of the divisions that we have at MassTech. Just for some context on my background, what I call my past life, spent a decade in the medical device surgical systems industry for a very vertically integrated company based out of Southern California, and left industry as a VP of Product Development and Engineering, and then went into a mid-career fellowship at MIT with a program called System Design and Management, a joint engineering business program, and then stayed on after the fellowship to be the industry director for that program for a few years. The joke of it is I think I've reached the career hat trick of academia, industry, and government, but I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not. But why don't we jump ahead here, David, and I'll tell folks here a little bit more about Mass Tech. And for some point of reference as to where we fit into the state organization, we are a quasi-state economic development authority. So we do report into the executive branch who under our governor, Maura Healey. If you hit next, David, we actually report into Secretary Yvonne Howe, who leads our Office of Economic Development. But we're not of the executive branch directly. It's easy to think of us as a .org, not a .gov. So there is some separation there. And we have a separate board of directors that the secretary chairs. We are one of what's considered a constellation of quasi-state economic development authorities. We all have different tools in our toolbox or different sort of parts of the economy that we focus on. If you hit next one more time, David, one of these is a clean energy center that reports into our Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. So if you jump ahead, the Mass Tech Collaborative was established in 1982 by legislative statute. Our mission and our makeup has evolved, over the last 40 plus years, along with technology and innovation. And there's quite a bit of that going on here in the state of Massachusetts. So our current mission is to strengthen the competitiveness of the tech and innovation economy. Just as the previous speakers talked about, yes, there's the technologies or the products and services, but a lot of it is about people and talent. We're currently organized across 5 different divisions. This is where I can explain a little bit more about my role. As on the program executive bucket, I have responsibility for our Mass Cyber Center, our eHealth or Digital Health Institute, and our Center for Advanced Manufacturing. And then on the investments strategy side is really looking holistically across our 5 divisions to try to harmonize our different funds and programs across the whole Commonwealth and a pretty broad set of stakeholders. Our Innovation Institute is where we do a lot of emerging technology cluster development. And our Broadband Institute is all about connectivity, digital equity, and a lot of community-based work. So as you can imagine, with cybersecurity and advanced manufacturing and emerging technologies, there's a lot of intersection across these different divisions. And some of this is, for economic development and opportunity, creating new technologies, helping support new company growth, or maybe new cyber companies. But then also on the flip side of that is on the threat prevention and protection side is the economic side of it, where there's the potential that cyber threats cause to limiting economic output, or things like ransomware that can actually have some pretty significant impact on businesses and operations. So if you jump ahead, David, at our Center for Advanced Manufacturing, and the way that we work across a lot of our divisions is pretty similar in that we have the convening authority of the state. So working across stakeholders, could be municipalities, small, medium, large manufacturers, a lot of academic institutions in the state of Massachusetts, but also risk capital or defense and security stakeholders to really look at how do we drive our strategic investments to help support technology development, maybe further technology demonstration, but especially with our manufacturers, technology adoption and deployment. And this is an area where cybersecurity definitely fits into the work that we do there as we support the growth of our manufacturing base in the state and the region. We also work quite a bit with Department of Defense for security stakeholders in the state, whether that's some of our bases like Kansas Air Force Base, but given our innovation ecosystem, we have a lot of defense innovation folks that operate within the Commonwealth. And a big part of this is our talent pipeline. Mass Tech is not a workforce talent delivery organization. Our role is really about, and this is I think Matt and David learned this in our meeting on Monday. I have a lot of bad puns, but our role is really to tie all of it together. So we bring together talent, industry, our education system, and our skills system, which, the way in which like our community colleges are architected could be different than other states. And if you jump ahead here, David, our Mass Cyber Center, again, is a lot of what the previous speakers spoke about. We really focus on people, process, and technology, and we think about how does that, how do we promote and improve cyber resiliency across Massachusetts. We've spent a lot of time, and I'll talk about a few programs and working initially with municipalities across the state. We have 351 towns and municipalities in the state of Massachusetts, and just like manufacturers or just like health systems, we see a pretty big spectrum of resources and capabilities and ability to prepare for cyber threats or do training. So the training component of that is how do we either provide resources ourselves, work with partners across the state to provide resources, and that could include our Executive Office of Technology Services and Systems, or our Office of Public Safety, and working with different public safety offices across the state. And then also, how do we engage our academic institutions and companies that could be great resources in helping to support this? The convening aspect is very similar here as in our Center for Advanced Manufacturing. And I'll dig into a couple specific things on the talent pipeline, but we're really look at, from early K through 12 STEM engagement up through community college, vocational technical school, and universities, and reskilling and upskilling. How do we provide mentorship opportunities? How do we provide internship opportunities? And I'll spend a little bit of time talking about this specific Security Operations Center and Range initiative that we just started this last year. That's starting to enable Security Operations Center services for municipalities, but really leveraging that as a key driver for talent and workforce development. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we've historically been doing a lot of work with municipalities, and we've developed and put out in a lot of work with our 351 municipalities a minimum baseline for cybersecurity. Now, this isn't a standard that the state is using, but this is a framework in which we try to break this down in an easily digestible way for municipal officials. But as you can see, as indicated by the 4 categories here: trained and cyber secure employees, improved threat sharing, cyber incidents response planning, and secure technology environment and best practices. These align quite a bit with what the past 2 presenters just talked about. Now, depending upon your sector, this being municipal versus manufacturing or some of the health sector that we work with, the types of people and processes that you may have can be quite different, or data privacy and regulatory standards could also be different. But the theme and the spirit here is very much the same. And some of the work that we do in a very hands-on way that has started to shift from just municipalities to health systems and manufacturers is really around cyber incidents response planning. We're finding that a lot of folks, while they know they need to be prepared for cybersecurity, they don't have a plan in place if there is an incident. And that plan isn't just about like, what are we going to do to mitigate things internally, but who can we talk to that can help? What's the communication pathway out? And when and who should we expect to hear back from? That could be our state infrastructure, that could be federal law enforcement and others. And one of the big things on that one is that, a lot of times, and I think the term around technology adoption for manufacturers that's been used is, manufacturers sometimes they feel like they're at home alone, right? They're in this by themselves. And we really look at cybersecurity, it's a team sport, right? There's not one person, there's not one technology that's going to solve your problem or make you safe. It is really about, people, process, and technology, and really understanding how it integrates into more of a risk management approach, depending upon, again, the sector that you're in. We have a whole lot of engagement across the Commonwealth, and, this includes our academic institutions and some of the major cybersecurity companies that exist here in the state that are helping shape the strategy of which we're deploying here. And with the upcoming CMMC 2.0 requirements, we've also been working with our MEP partner, Mass MEP, on a number of different efforts around this. We jump to the next slide. As Nichelle talked about quite a bit, the talent and workforce shortage in cybersecurity, we are not spared by that here in Massachusetts, and it exists in manufacturing, it exists in the public sector. definitely exists in our health sector. 11 of the top employers in the state of Massachusetts are health systems. And so that is a very major area in which we have a big need for cybersecurity professionals. And we have found, though, that there is a lot of interest by students getting into the sector, but providing them with the types of hands-on training that industry or manufacturers are looking for has been a gap that's been identified. And one way in which we're working to address this gap is the Cybersecurity Security Operations Center and Range Initiative. The Massachusetts legislature and administration put about $18 million towards this initiative starting last year over the next roughly 5 years to establish a statewide network of ranges and SOCs. And these are located at some of our academic institutions or other locations across the state. Thus far, we've made 2 awards, one to Bridgewater State University, which is in the southeast of the state, and also one to Springfield Union Station, which is in central Massachusetts. And what we're doing here is that ultimately these facilities will be able to deploy security operation services to municipalities, nonprofits, and small businesses. But then also leveraging those facilities with the use of range licenses or other academic programming to create, depending on where this is located in the partners, different boot camps or workshops, actual undergraduate and graduate programs, but giving students these hands-on opportunities to one, engage potentially in leveraging the range, but then also integrating in through apprenticeship or internship programs with our SOC providers as well. There's a little more architecture to this in terms of how we're leveraging a recently stood up separate nonprofit called Cyber Trust Massachusetts to help kind of be the glue across the network and really help from an operations and economies of scale standpoint. But this is an area that we see as a really big opportunity for us to start addressing that gap that we've identified as a way to help increase the influx of cybersecurity or cyber aware professionals going into whether it's manufacturing or other industries or the municipal sector. There's a lot more that we do. I just tried to stick specifically to these things. So happy to answer more questions, but I'll go ahead and stop here for the time being, Matt and David.
Thanks, Ben. This is great. There's a question that just came in from down there in Florida. And it gets at the question that I wanted to ask really each of you. There are a lot of tools and tactics out there, to your points that the threat is changing and increasing in many ways. And, the manufacturing sector and the supply chains, the small and medium-sized enterprises, this is daunting to them. And so I'm curious about how, we need the manufacturing sector to do a lot of things, right? We make smarter products that solve problems, and we're going to require a lot of innovation there. So I'm concerned about the deterrent impact on our manufacturing sector by just the scope of the threat, and so I'm curious about how you guys see, that we can instill confidence in our manufacturers to tackle this this challenge. And so I don't know, Chris, if you're still on, if you want to talk to that, but I'd be curious for just a quick response, or if there is one, from each of you on that front, because you could go into the silo of cybersecurity and lose all of the energy and innovation that we have in this country to make smarter products that solve problems. So let's start with you, Chris, on that one.
Well, and I know that others will have their own things to put into this, but I'd say we always start with something really tangible and probably one of the largest threats, and I'd say maybe that's ransomware. So if we're looking at something that could bring a business to its knees, right, really stop it, let's just address that one. And I'd say the one thing that they could start with right away is to go to this Department of Homeland Security, into CISA, and download a very, very useful tool called the CSAT cybersecurity evaluation tool. Inside of there, there's many, many things, but one of them is a ransomware readiness assessment. And it's a very organized thing that you can do, so it's tangible, and it'll take you through a whole process of how you evaluate yourself about how ready you are. And so right then, I think they would start to gain some traction, right? They would have a plan of something to do. They start doing that plan. The biggest thing is just to get some momentum. And that would say, let's deal with the biggest threat. Let's get some traction. Now I know I've got to do some things.
Thanks for that, Chris. How about you? What's your take on that, Nichelle?
So I'd say, leverage these state and federal resources that we've mentioned. In particular, I know in the state of North Carolina, they're looking for opportunities for the students to have these structured apprenticeships and internships, and so to get their on-the-job training. And so become a part of that network or that consortium that's looking to train folks for you. And so maybe you become a preferred employer so that students know, hey, we're going to go here afterward. I did all my work there. I know their systems. I can hit the ground running when I get there. So
thank you for that. How about you, Ben?
Yeah, I've got sort of two things that come to mind. And one I would say is, like, for folks that are, if they're on this webinar and they are cybersecurity professionals that work in manufacturing, raise your hand to be a mentor. One of the gating factors that we have in our mentorship program is not an interest of number of students, it's actually a number of mentors. And I think this is an area that we really all need to work together on and continuing to support folks coming into the industry. The other area, and I didn't talk very much about sort of the programs that we do in the state in our Center for Advanced Manufacturing for supporting small, medium manufacturers that need to adopt new technology. And these aren't next generation production technologies. This could be things like a CNC machine, or new welding equipment. And there's a couple of chicken and egg aspects that come around this. One is, we're interested in our companies growing or, capturing new revenue and new jobs. And there was always this question of, when do manufacturers increase training of their employees or hire new people? Is it when they get new technology? Is it after? Is it when they get new jobs from suppliers? And so we've started a program called MMAP, and I won't try the acronym. We have too many of those, just like everywhere else, but it's all about this modernization approach. And we provide risk capital to manufacturers of up to $250,000 to adopt new equipment. And what we found is that's at least been for us the chicken and egg equation of the adoption problem, because then they do either upskill existing employees or bring on some new employees. We're providing a little bit of risk capital to help them to grow. But at that same time, we leverage that program to connect them to folks like MassMAP or others that provide other services, because part of that adoption of new technology that's going to help their business or help create better or higher quality products is then recognizing that some of those new technologies have new requirements, right, around cybersecurity, how you're ultimately integrating those into your operations and your network. And so that aspect of it is, again, how do we create relationships between manufacturers and these folks that have a lot of great services and other things that can help them, sometimes for free. They just maybe haven't been aware of them. So there's this big awareness problem is a piece of it. But we look at how do we leverage the grant programs and things that we have to actually create those relationships and help in these project areas.
Well, that's great. Hey, we are at the top of the hour. It's having it's going to take a village, right, to build the kind of resilience we need with cybersecurity and security in general for the American manufacturing sector. And so we're lucky to have the benefit of the insights of all three of you outstanding professionals in regions around the country. It's good to have the National Governors Association as part of this call, so that message can go out to states all around the country, as well as to the many AMCC stakeholders who those on the call, but also those that will get the links to all of this, so that these best practices can be shared. I want to extend our sincere thanks to everyone involved in putting this on. Chris, Nichelle, and Ben, thank you very much. And thank you in advance for responding to folks' questions going forward. an important area to address. And to my earlier point, not only to avoid the worst, but also, create protections so that we can innovate to solve problems that we need through American manufacturing. So that's it for now, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you all.